The Emerald Tide. The 157 million ghost ship content warning. The following story contains descriptions of drug trafficking, organized crime, violence, and other sensitive content that may be disturbing to some viewers. This content is intended for mature audiences 18 years and older. All names, specific locations, and identifying details have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. While based on real events, certain elements have been modified for narrative clarity and legal protection. This presentation is for informational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute legal advice or endorsement of any criminal activities. Introduction. The rain hammered against the windows of my office like 1,000 tiny fists demanding entry. 3 a.m, and sleep was a distant memory. That's how it always starts, with insomnia and the ghosts of cases that refuse to die. My name is Detective William Shernan, and I specialize in the unsolvable. For 27 years, I've been the one they call when the trail goes cold, when ordinary methods fail, and when justice seems like a fading dream. Tonight was different. Tonight, the ghosts were louder. I stared at the wall of photographs before Mia, maritime ballet of catastrophe frozen in time. A massive cargo vessel listing dangerously in choppy North Atlantic waters. Surveillance photos of men in expensive suits with haunted eyes. Evidence bags containing substances worth more than their weight in gold. And at the center of it all, a handwritten note with a single name. The Emerald Tide. 157 million. That's what they estimated the cargo was worth. Not the ship, just what was hidden inside her. Enough drugs to poison a small nation. Enough money to buy a small island, and enough blood to paint the Irish Sea red. This wasn't just another case. This was the crown jewel of the O'Malley Syndicatia criminal enterprise that had terrorized Ireland and reached tentacles into America, Britain, and beyond. For decades, they'd operated with impunity, their activities whispered about in bars but never spoken of in courtrooms. They were ghosts untouchable, invisible, deadly. Until the night the Emerald Tide was found adrift in international waters, its crew vanished like morning mist. Its cargo hold a testament to mankind's insatiable appetite for self-destruction. I'd been chasing the O'Malleys for 15 years. 15 years of dead informants, destroyed evidence, and judges who suddenly recused themselves when certain names appeared in case files. 15 years of watching good people disappear or die. 15 years of nightmares. But something had changed. Someone had betrayed the syndicate, and the Emerald Tide was the evidence. What happens when a criminal empire starts to implode? What desperate measures will men take when their kingdom of shadows begins to crumble? Tonight, I'll take you through the looking glass. I'll show you how the mighty fall. And perhaps, by journey's end, you'll understand why some cases haunt detectives until their dying day. This is the story of the Emerald Tide and the shocking downfall of the most powerful Irish cartel in history. The beginning of the end. I remember exactly where I was when the call came in. February 12th, 2018. A miserable Tuesday evening in my apartment in Baltimore. 22 years with the DEA, and I'd recently transitioned to heading a special task force focused on international drug trafficking. My Dinera microwave lasagna was getting cold as I reviewed files for a different case altogether. My secure phone rang. Not my regular cell. The secure line that only 5 people in the world had the number for. Shernan, I answered, balancing the phone between my ear and shoulder while reaching for a pen. We found it. The voice belonged to Agent Michaels, my contact in maritime operations. 50 nautical miles southwest of Cork. Adrift. No crew. I sat up straight, my food forgotten. The Emerald Tide? That's right. Coast Guard intercepted. They're towing it to port now. The Emerald Tide wasn't just any ship. For 3 years, we'd been hearing rumors of the O'Malley Syndicate's Masterpiece A vessel specifically modified to transport unprecedented quantities of cocaine and heroin from South America to Europe. A ghost ship that changed registration, name, and appearance as it crossed the Atlantic. We had satellite images, informant testimonies, wire intercepts, but never enough to pinpoint its location. Until now. Any sign of what happened to the crew? I asked. None. Lifeboat's still on board. No distress call. It's like they all just vanished. The cargo? A pause. Still there. Initial estimates say it's the mother lode. Biggest seizure in Atlantic history. My hand tightened on the pen until my knuckles went white. I'm coming over. Have a team ready. There's more, Michael said, his voice dropping. We found something in the captain's quarters. A ledger. Names, dates, amounts. It's everything, Shernan. Everything. When you've been chasing shadows for as long as I had, you learn not to get excited by promises of breakthrough evidence. Too many times, I'd seen miraculous discoveries evaporate into jurisdictional disputes, evidence contamination, or mysterious fires in evidence rooms. But something in Michael's voice told me this was different. Secure that ledger, I said. Double the guard detail. Trust no one outside our immediate team. Already done. But there's one more thing you should know. I waited. The last entry in the ledger. It's a name. Patrick O'Malley. The air left my lungs as if I'd been punched. Patrick O'Malley, the eldest son of Connor O'Malley, the syndicate's patriarch. The heir apparent. The ghost who had never been photographed, never been recorded, never left a trace. What about him? It just says, Patrick betrayed us all. As I hung up the phone and began packing for Ireland, I had no idea that those 4 words would trigger the most complex case of my career, a labyrinth of betrayal, violence, and secrets that would claim more lives before revealing its center. Have you ever had that feeling, that moment when you know you're standing at the edge of something momentous? When ordinary life suddenly takes a sharp turn into the extraordinary? That's what I felt that night. And if you'll stay with me through this story, you'll understand why this case changed everything we thought we knew about international drug cartels. I was on a plane to Ireland within 3 hours, my mind racing with possibilities. Who would betray the most feared crime family in Ireland? What kind of death wish would drive someone to such an act? And more importantly, where were they now? The ghost ship. The port of Cobh, Ireland isn't what most tourists imagine when they think of the Emerald Isle. No rolling green hills or charming cottages, here just industrial cranes, container ships, and the constant smell of diesel and sea salt. On the morning I arrived, the sky was a slate gray ceiling pressing down on the world, and a fine mist hung in the air, blurring the boundaries between water, land, and sky. Perfect weather for ghosts. The Emerald Tide was moored at a secure dock, surrounded by a small army of Irish Gardaí, customs officials, and special forces. The vessel itself was unremarkable at first glancia. Standard cargo ship about 400 feet long, with peeling blue paint and rust stains trailing down its hull like dried tears. But as I approached, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. There was something wrong about this ship, something unnatural in the way it sat in the water. Detective Inspector Liam Connolly of the Irish National Drug Unit met me at the security perimeter. A 15-year veteran with eyes that had seen too much. Connolly had been my liaison on Irish soil for several joint operations. "Welcome to Ireland, Shernan," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Wish it was under better circumstances." "Don't you always?" I replied, scanning the scene. "What's the situation?" Connolly gestured toward the ship. "We've secured the vessel and completed an initial sweep. The cargo is substantial. Conservative estimate puts the street value at $157 million. Mostly cocaine, some heroin, and about $50 million in cash. And the crew? That's where it gets strange," Connolly said, lowering his voice despite the howling wind. 12 crew members were supposed to be aboard, according to the manifest. All experienced sailors. No signs of struggle, no blood, no evidence of violence. Food left half-eaten in the galley. Engine was operational. Radio works fine. One lifeboat is missing, but the emergency locator beacon was never activated. I frowned. So they just left? Looks that way. But here's the thing. Why abandon a ship that's perfectly seaworthy? And why leave behind cargo worth millions? It doesn't make sense. Nothing about the O'Malleys ever makes sense until you see the whole picture, I said. What about the ledger? Connolly led me toward a temporary command post set up in a shipping container on the dock. It's secured there. We haven't digitized it yet. Thought you'd want to see it exactly as we found it. Inside the makeshift office, A female officer stood guard over a clear evidence container. Inside was a leather-bound book, surprisingly elegant for something used to record criminal transactions. Officer Ryan hasn't let it out of her sight since it was brought ashore, Connolly explained. Officer Ryan nodded professionally. No one has touched it without gloves, sir. Thank you, officer. I pulled on a pair of nitrile gloves and carefully opened the container. The ledger was old-school handwritten entries in meticulous penmanship. Dates, locations, amounts, names. A comprehensive record of the O'Malley Syndicate's Atlantic operations going back 5 years. Hundreds of millions in drugs, weapons, and occasionally human trafficking. Bribes to officials in 6 countries. The names of ships, captains, dock workers, and corrupt officials. It was enough to take down not just the O'Malleys, but entire portions of their network across Europe and the Americas. And there, on the final page, written in a different hand than the rest, more hurried, almost angry in its strokes. Patrick betrayed us all. Find him. Has anyone touched this page specifically? I asked, looking up at Officer Ryan. No, sir. The book was open to a different page when found. I studied the entry again. The ink was slightly smeared, suggesting it had been written recently, perhaps just before the crew abandoned ship. I need to see the captain's quarters where this was found, I told Connolly. He nodded, and we made our way back outside and up the gangway of the Emerald Tide. Have you ever walked onto a ship that's been abandoned by its crew? There's a particular quality to the silence. It's not peaceful or empty. It's expectant, watchful, as if the vessel itself is holding its breath, waiting for someone to explain what happened to the humans who once gave it purpose. The corridors were narrow and utilitarian, painted an industrial green that had faded to the color of algae. Our footsteps echoed metallically as Connolly led me to the captain's quarters. "We've photographed everything and taken preliminary forensic samples," he explained, "but otherwise left things untouched." The captain's cabin was surprisingly spacious, with a desk bolted to the floor, a narrow bunk, and a small private bathroom. A half-drunk cup of coffee sat on the desk, a thin layer of mold now growing on its surface. A jacket hung on the back of the chair. On the desk, next to where the ledger had been found, was a satellite phone. "Was this logged as evidence?" I asked, pointing to the phone. "Yes. Battery was dead when we found it. We've sent it to the lab for analysis." I scanned the room slowly, trying to read the space like a text. "The captain was interrupted," I said finally. "He was sitting here, documenting something in the ledger, when something caused him to leave suddenly without his jacket, without finishing his coffee." We thought the same, Connolly agreed. But what could make an entire crew abandon a valuable shipment and their vessel? I moved to a small porthole and looked out at the gray Irish Sea. "Fear," I said simply. "The kind of fear that only the O'Malleys can inspire." As I turned back to the room, something caught my eye. A small scratch on the metal wall beside the desk recent, the exposed metal still shiny. I leaned closer. "Was this documented?" I asked. Connolly frowned. "I don't recall seeing it in the report." I took out a small flashlight and examined the scratch more carefully. It wasn't random. It was a crude, hastily carved symbol. A triangle with a line through it. "We need to find out what this means," I said, straightening up. "And I want the satellite phone analyzed immediately." "You think it's important? On a ghost ship with 157 million in drugs and a missing crew? Everything is important." As we continued our inspection of the vessel, the mystery only deepened. The ship's log showed a normal journey from Venezuela. Weather reports indicated no significant storms. The engine room was immaculate, displaying none of the damage you'd expect if mechanical failure had forced an evacuation. In the crew quarters, we found personal items left behind, photographs of families, books, electronics. One room contained a half-written letter home. No one had packed a bag before leaving. "Whatever happened here," I said as we returned to the deck. "It happened fast. The crew left in a hurry, taking only what they were wearing." Connolly nodded grimly. "The question is, where did they go? And are they still alive?" I looked out at the vast expanse of the Atlantic stretching to the horizon. Given what they were carrying and who they were working for, what would you guess? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The O'Malley Syndicate didn't tolerate failure, and they certainly didn't tolerate the loss of 157 million in product. As the day wore on, forensic teams combed every inch of the vessel, while officials began the massive task of documenting and securing the illicit cargo. I stayed focused on the ledger and the captain's quarters, convinced that the answer to the ship's abandonment lay there. By evening, the laboratory had managed to extract data from the satellite phone. The last call had been made 3 days earlier to a number in Dublin registered to a shell company we already knew was connected to the O'Malleys. "Can we get a warrant for the call records?" I asked Connolly. "Already in process," he replied. "But don't get your hopes up. The O'Malleys are careful with their communications." I nodded, unsurprised. "What about the symbol? Any ideas?" "Nothing yet. We're checking with our gang unit to see if it matches any known markers." As darkness fell over the port, I stood on the deck of the Emerald Tide, letting the salt air clear my head. 15 years of pursuing the O'Malleys had taught me that nothing was ever as it seemed with them. Every apparent victory concealed a trap. Every piece of evidence had to be questioned. The abandoned ship with its valuable cargo wasn't a lucky break for law enforcement. It was the opening move in a new game whose rules I didn't yet understand. Behind me, I heard footsteps approach. "Detective Shernan?" It was Officer Ryan. "We found something you should see. The betrayer." Officer Ryan led me to the ship's small medical bay where forensic technicians were processing evidence. On a stainless steel examination table lay a small object that at first glance appeared to be nothing more than a tarnished coin. "It was wedged between the mattress and frame in the captain's bunk," she explained. "Standard sweep missed it, but when we did the deep search you requested, we found it." I pulled on a fresh pair of gloves and picked up the object. Not a coin, a medallion, about the size of a $50, made of what appeared to be silver. On one side was an intricate Celtic knot. On the other, the same triangle with a line through it that had been scratched on the wall. "Has anyone run this design through our databases?" I asked. "Yes, sir. No official matches. It's not associated with any known criminal organization, gang, or paramilitary group." I turned the medallion over in my hand, feeling its weight. And yet, here it is on a ship carrying 157 million in illegal cargo. "There's something else," Ryan said hesitantly. "The lab got a partial print off the satellite phone. No match in our system, but..." She paused. "But what?" "The analysis shows unusual scarring patterns consistent with burn injuries. And the phone's call history showed multiple connections to a number we believe is associated with Patrick O'Malley." My pulse quickened. Patrick O'Malley, name from the ledger, the alleged betrayer. "Did you say burn injuries?" I asked, a memory stirring. "Yes, sir. Distinctive patterns on the right thumb and index finger." I closed my eyes briefly, accessing a mental file I'd compiled years ago. "Get me everything you can on fire incidents connected to the O'Malleys within the last decade. Specifically, any reports of burn victims." Ryan nodded and hurried off to make the necessary calls. I returned my attention to the medallion. The triangle, with a line through it. A symbol of disruption, perhaps? Of something being cut off or divided? Connolly joined me, his face grave. "We've got a development. A fishing boat found a body washing ashore about 10 miles south of here. Male, mid-40s, gunshot wound to the back of the head. One of the crew, can't confirm yet, but he was wearing a uniform consistent with merchant marine attire." I pocketed the medallion. "I need to see the body." An hour later, I stood in the county morgue, looking down at the pale, waterlogged face of a man whose final moments had clearly been terrifying. Despite the damage from his time in the water, the execution-style wound was unmistakable professional, precise. "Do we have an ID?" I asked the medical examiner, a tired-looking woman in her 50s. "Passport in his pocket," says Thomas Murray, Irish citizen. "Dental records are being processed for confirmation." I studied the corpse carefully. His hands were calloused in patterns consistent with a life at sea. No visible tattoos or distinguishing marks. But there was something about his face that seemed familiar. "Can you pull up the crew manifest for the Emerald Tide?" The ME handed me a tablet with the document already loaded. I scrolled through it quickly. No Thomas Murray listed. "Let me see his personal effects," I requested. A plastic bin was produced containing the items recovered from the body-sodden clothing. A waterproof watch. A wallet with about €60. and a laminated ID card so damaged by seawater that the name was illegible. But the photo, though faded, was clear enough. The dead man was not Thomas Murray. He was Michael Doyle, the Emerald Tide's first officer, according to the manifest. He was traveling under a false identity, I said aloud. Not surprising, given the cargo he was helping transport, the ME commented. No, I agreed. But interesting that he felt the need for a cover identity when the entire operation was already illegal. It suggests he was hiding from someone besides law enforcement. As I left the morgue, my phone rang. It was Officer Ryan. Sir, we found something on those fire incidents you asked about. 7 years ago, there was a suspicious fire at a warehouse in Limerick owned by a company linked to the O'Malleys. 3 people were hospitalized with severe burns. One of them was Patrick O'Malley. Do we have medical records? Specifically, information about what parts of his body were burned? Working on it, sir. But there's more. One of the other burn victims was Michael Doyle, the first officer on the Emerald Tide. I stopped walking, the implications hitting me like a physical blow. The dead man we just examined. He was connected to Patrick O'Malley before ever setting foot on that ship. Yes, sir. And according to hospital records, they shared a room during their recovery. I resumed walking, faster now. I need everything we have on that fire. Witness statements, investigation reports, follow-up interviews. And I want protective custody for anyone who responded to that fire who might still be alive. Sir? Because, Officer Ryan, I think we just found our first piece of the puzzle. The Emerald Tide wasn't just carrying drugs. It was carrying a secretone that got its first officer executed. As I drove back to the port, my mind raced through possibilities. What if the fire 7 years ago wasn't an accident? What if it was an attempt on Patrick O'Malley's life disguised as an industrial accident? And what if Michael Doyle had saved him, earning a loyalty that transcended family ties? The ledger's cryptic note made more sense now. Patrick betrayed us all. Not outsiders, not law enforcement, but his own family. The O'Malley syndicate itself. Back at the command post, I spread out everything we had. So far photographs of the Emerald Tide, the medallion, reports on Michael Doyle's body, and preliminary data from the ledger. We've been looking at this all wrong, I told Connolly when he arrived. This isn't about a drug shipment gone wrong. This is about an internal power struggle within the O'Malley organization. Connolly looked skeptical. Based on what? The timing, the precision, the message left in the ledger. Someone wanted us to find that ship. Someone wanted us to know about Patrick's betrayal. You're suggesting Patrick O'Malley deliberately sabotaged his own family's operation? Why would he do that? I held up the medallion. This symbol? I think it represents a faction within the organization, one that wants to take the O'Malleys in a different direction. Maybe Patrick is their leader. Connolly considered this. Even if you're right, where does that leave us? We still have 11 missing crew members, a dead first officer, and no clear idea what happened on that ship. But we have a starting point now, I argued. We find Patrick O'Malley. We find our answers. Shernan, nobody finds Patrick O'Malley unless he wants to be found. He's a ghost. I smiled grimly. Then it's time we start believing in ghosts. My plan was risky, but 15 years of conventional approaches had yielded nothing in our pursuit of the O'Malleys. It was time to try something different. First, I needed to understand the meaning of the medallion. While experts continued searching databases, I took a different approach. I visited a professor of Celtic studies at Trinity College Dublin, showing her a photograph of the artifact without explaining its origins. "Oh, that's interesting, Doctor," Eleanor Burke said, adjusting her glasses. "Where did you find this?" "It came up in an investigation," I said vaguely. "Can you tell me what it represents?" She studied the image carefully. The Celtic knot is fairly standard, represents eternity, the interconnectedness of life and death. But this other symbol, she tapped the triangle with the line through it. This isn't traditional Celtic symbolism. It looks more like a modern adaptation. In certain neo-pagan circles, a triangle represents 3 aspects of existence: mind, body, spirit. A line through it could symbolize transcendence, breaking through these aspects to something beyond. Or breaking away from something, I suggested. She nodded. Could be. Symbols are fluid in their interpretation. Is there any context you can share? I hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. It may be connected to a group that's separated from a larger organization, a splinter faction. Dr. Kruth. Burke's eyes lit up with academic interest. Fascinating. In that context, it could indeed represent severance or division. The triangle could symbolize the three traditional pillars of power: military strength, economic control, and social influence. The line would indicate a radical disruption of that power structure. As I left her office, pieces began falling into place in my mind. Patrick O'Malley wasn't just betraying his family, he was trying to fundamentally change how they operated. But why? And why now? My next step was even more unorthodox. Using information from the ledger, I identified several lower-level associates of the O'Malley syndicate who might have knowledge of internal politics but weren't high enough to be completely loyal to the core family. Through confidential informants, I arranged a meeting with one such person, Sean Kelly, a bar owner in Dublin whose establishment laundered money for the O'Malleys. The meeting would take place at his bar after closing time, with no official record. Just a conversation. Kelly's pub was a traditional Irish establishment with dark wood paneling and the perpetual smell of stale beer. When I arrived at midnight, Kelly was waiting, a stocky man in his 50s with a permanently wary expression. "I don't talk to cops," he said as soon as I sat down across from him. "I'm not here as a cop," I replied. "I'm here as someone who wants to prevent a bloodbath." His eyes narrowed. "What bloodbath?" I placed the medallion on the table between us. Kelly's face remained impassive, but a small muscle twitched near his eye. "You recognize this," I said. It wasn't a question. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Mr. Kelly, in about 48 hours, every law enforcement agency in Ireland and beyond will be moving against the O'Malley syndicate based on evidence from the Emerald Tide. When that happens, anyone caught in the crossfire between Conor O'Malley and whoever is behind this symbol will be collateral damage. That could include you." Fear flashed briefly across his face before he controlled it. "I run a pub. That's all." A pub that received €840 in cash deposits last year, despite having seating for only 40 people. Quite a profitable business. He stared at me for a long moment, then sighed. "What do you want to know?" "The symbol. What does it represent?" Kelly glanced at the door, then leaned forward. "They call themselves the Broken Triangle. Been around for about 5 years, but very quiet until recently. They want to move the organization away from drugs, focus on legitimate businesses. And Patrick O'Malley is their leader?" Kelly's eyes widened slightly. "You know more than you should. What happened 7 years ago in that warehouse fire?" He shook his head. "That I won't discuss. Some things even I don't talk about." "Fair enough. What about the Emerald Tide? What happened to the crew? Word is they're in protective custody." I leaned back, surprised. "Whose protective custody?" Kelly gave a humorless laugh. "Patrick's, of course. You think Connor doesn't have people in every police force? Every Coast Guard unit? The crew wasn't safe once the ship was compromised. And Michael Doyle? The first officer who washed up with a bullet in his head?" Pain flickered across Kelly's face. Michael was Patrick's right-hand man. Must have been caught trying to help the others escape. I studied Kelly carefully. He seemed genuinely distressed about Doyle's death. "You knew him?" "Everyone knew Mickey. Good man. Loyal. Didn't deserve what happened." "And what's going to happen next, Mr. Kelly?" He looked at me with tired eyes. "War. Connor won't tolerate this betrayal, especially from his own son. He'll tear apart Ireland looking for Patrick and anyone who supports him. Unless we find Patrick first." Kelly shook his head. "You won't find him. And even if you did, you couldn't protect him. Not from Connor." I picked up the medallion and stood to leave. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Kelly." As I reached the door, he called after me. "Detective, if you do somehow find him, tell Patrick that Mickey died clean." He didn't talk. I nodded and stepped out into the Dublin night, my mind working through this new information. The Broken Triangle, a faction within the O'Malley syndicate led by Patrick, attempting to legitimize operations. A power struggle between father and son that had escalated to the point where Patrick was willing to sacrifice a $157 million shipment and expose their operations to law enforcement. But where was Patrick now? And more importantly, what was his endgame? Ask yourself, what would drive a man to betray his own family? To risk everything, including his life, for a fundamental change in how they operated? Money? Power? Or perhaps something more profound like the realization that the family business was destroying not just others, but the family itself? The hidden truth. The investigation accelerated over the next 24 hours. Using information from the ledger, law enforcement agencies across Europe and the Americas began coordinating raids on O'Malley-connected operations. Bank accounts were frozen, suspects arrested, properties seized. It was the beginning of the end for the syndicate's traditional power structure. But the central mystery remained unsolved. Where was Patrick O'Malley, and what exactly had happened aboard the Emerald Tide? My breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The lab analysis of the satellite phone recovered from the captain's quarters revealed something interesting. The last message sent wasn't a call, but a text message to a phone registered to a woman named Sarah Donovan. The message read simply, "Triangle broken. Proceed to contingency location. Bring the package." Sarah Donovan's name wasn't in our databases. She had no criminal record, no known connections to the O'Malleys. On paper, she was a 34-year-old nurse who worked at the same hospital where Patrick and Michael had been treated for their burns 7 years earlier. It could be nothing, Connolly cautioned when I shared the lead. The phone could have been used by someone else. Or it could be everything, I countered. We need to find her. Sarah Donovan's apartment in a suburban area of Dublin was empty when we arrived. Neighbors reported that she hadn't been seen for several days. Nothing unusual about the apartment itself, tastefully decorated, clean, organized. No obvious signs of a hasty departure. But in her bedroom closet, behind a row of shoes, we found a small safe. It took specialists several hours to open it, and inside was a single item, a USB drive. The drive contained hundreds of medical files patient records from burn victims treated at St. Vincent's Hospital over the past decade. Most were routine cases, but several stood out. Patrick O'Malley, Michael Doyle, and a third man named Thomas Burke. Why would a nurse risk stealing patient records? Connolly wondered as we reviewed the files. I focused on Burke's file. Unlike the others, his burns were far more severe, third degree over 60 of his body. He'd been admitted the same night as Patrick and Michael, also from the warehouse fire. Because these aren't just medical records, I realized. They're evidence. Burke's file included photographs of his injuries upon admission. Mixed in with the burn documentation were images of older injury scars consistent with prolonged torture. Broken fingers that had healed improperly. Cigarette burns on his torso. Thomas Burke, I murmured. Why does that name sound familiar? Connolly was already typing on his laptop. Thomas Burke, reported missing 3 years before the warehouse fire. Former accountant for an import company, suspected of being an O'Malley front. The pieces clicked together in my mind with terrible clarity. They weren't just running drugs. They were torturing people in that warehouse. Burke probably knew something they wanted. Financial details, account numbers, and the fire could have been an accident during an interrogation. Or what? I met Connolly's eyes. Or someone said it deliberately, to stop what was happening there. We dug deeper into the hospital records. Sarah Donovan had been the primary nurse assigned to all 3 burn victims. Her notes were detailed, professional, but between the lines was something more. Concern, compassion, particularly for Patrick O'Malley. One entry stood out. Patient continues to express remorse about circumstances of the incident. Requests private conversation with patient 3, Burke. Granted with supervision. She knew, I said. She knew what really happened that night. Connolly nodded slowly. And 7 years later, she's receiving coded messages about triangles and packages. We need to find her, I insisted. She's the key to all of this. Finding Sarah Donovan became our top priority. We traced her movements in the days before her disappearance shifts at the hospital, grocery shopping, a visit to a local cafe. Nothing unusual. No sign of duress or preparation for flight. Until we checked her bank records. 3 days before vanishing, the same day the Emerald Tide was discovered, she had withdrawn €50 in cash. Emergency money, I commented. Or getaway funds, Connolly suggested. We expanded our search. checking transportation records, flights, ferries, train bookings. Nothing under her name. Then Officer Ryan made a discovery. Sarah Donovan had a sister living in a remote part of County Donegal, near the northern coast. The sister, Mary Fitzgerald, owned a small cottage overlooking the Atlantic. "It's isolated," Ryan reported. "Nearest neighbor is 2 miles away. Perfect hideout." "Or perfect trap," I cautioned. "If we've made this connection, the O'Malleys might have as well." We assembled a small team: myself, Connolly, Ryan, and 2 trusted officers from the emergency response unit. The approach would be cautious, with no sirens or marked vehicles, just a quiet visit to ask some questions. The drive to Donegal took nearly 4 hours, much of it on winding coastal roads that hugged cliffs dropping hundreds of feet to the churning Atlantic below. Rain lashed the vehicles, and wind bent trees nearly horizontal. Nature itself seemed to be warning us away. As we neared the cottage, I instructed the team to park half a mile out and approach on foot. No chances, no assumptions. The cottage was small but sturdy, built of local stone to withstand the brutal coastal weather. A thin tendril of smoke rose from the chimney, almost invisible in the rain. "Someone's home," Connolly observed as we crouched behind a low stone wall 100 yards from the property. Through binoculars, I studied the cottage carefully. Curtains drawn. A muddy vehicle parked to one side, not Sarah's car, according to our records. No movement visible. We go in slow, I decided. Connolly and I will approach from the front, identifying ourselves clearly. The rest of you cover the perimeter. No one fires unless fired upon. As we emerged from cover and began our approach, I felt exposed, vulnerable. 15 years of pursuing the O'Malleys had taught me never to underestimate their resources or ruthlessness. 20 yards from the front door, it opened. A woman stood in the doorway, mid-30s. Auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing jeans and a heavy sweater. Sarah Donovan. "I've been expecting you," she called, her voice carrying over the wind. "Detective Shernan, isn't it?" I stopped, surprised. "How do you know my name?" She smiled thinly. "Patrick said you were the only one who might figure it out. Please come in, all of you, before his father's men realize you're here." Inside, the cottage was warm and sparsely furnished. A fire crackled in a stone hearth. Maps were spread across a wooden table alongside what appeared to be shipping manifests and financial documents. "Where is Patrick O'Malley?" I asked once we were all inside. Sarah gestured to the documents. "Preparing." The Emerald Tide was just the beginning. The beginning of what? The end of the O'Malley Syndicate. She looked at me directly, her green eyes unflinching. "Isn't that what you've wanted for 15 years, Detective?" I studied her carefully. No signs of duress. No indication she was speaking under compulsion. "Why don't you tell me what happened 7 years ago in that warehouse fire?" Pain flickered across her face. I was working the burn unit when they brought them in. Patrick, Michael, and Thomas. Thomas was the worst. We didn't think he'd survive the night. She moved to the fire, staring into the flames as if seeing the past there. Patrick was conscious, in pain, but lucid. He kept asking about Thomas, demanding to know if he'd live. I thought it was guilt the fire had started in the section of the warehouse where they were holding Thomas. "Holding him?" Connolly interjected. Sarah turned to face us. "Torturing him." Thomas Burke was an accountant who had discovered that Connor O'Malley was skimming profits from his own organization. Millions that should have been distributed to his lieutenants and partners were instead being funneled to private accounts. Connor ordered Thomas kidnapped, tortured until he revealed where the evidence was hidden. I remembered the photos of Burke's injuries, the systematic abuse that had preceded the burns. And Patrick was part of this? She shook her head vehemently. No, Patrick was there to stop it. He discovered what his father was doing, not just the financial theft, but how brutal the organization had become. Torture, execution, terrorizing families of anyone who crossed them. The O'Malleys had started as smugglers with a codino violence against women or children. No drugs sold to minors. Connor had abandoned all of that. "So, Patrick set the fire?" I asked. "No," she said quietly, "I did." The revelation hung in the air like smoke. None of us had anticipated this confession. "You?" Connolly finally managed. Sarah nodded. "Thomas Burke was my cousin. I had no idea he'd been kidnapped, just that he'd gone missing. That night, I was dropping off supplies at a community clinic near the warehouse. I saw men dragging someone inside. Even from a distance, I recognized Thomas. She took a deep breath. I called the police, but I knew they wouldn't arrive in time. The O'Malleys owned too many cops. So, I followed them in. Through a window I saw. Her voice broke. I saw what they were doing to him. And Patrick was there? I prompted gently. He arrived while I was watching. There was an argument, Patrick trying to make them stop. When they wouldn't, he pulled a gun. That's when I created a diversion. I found a fuel source for the clinic's generator, broke a window, and threw it in. The fire spread faster than I expected. I tried to process this information. So Patrick was trying to reform the organization from within, even back then. Yes, she confirmed. After they recovered, Patrick and Michael began building a network within the syndicate people who wanted to return to the old ways or leave crime altogether. They called themselves the Broken Triangle, I finished. She looked impressed. You have been thorough. What happened on the Emerald Tide? Connolly asked. Sarah moved to the table and sorted through the papers. Connor discovered Patrick's faction. He ordered the elimination of everyone involved. The ship was supposed to be a trap, Patrick, and his key allies were meant to be aboard when Connor's loyal men took control. But Patrick was warned. By you? She nodded. I still worked at the hospital. Connor came in for treatment heart condition. I overheard him on the phone giving the orders. So Patrick removed the crew before Connor's men arrived, I surmised. Exactly. But they caught Michael helping with the evacuation. The others made it to safety. I considered this new information. And now? What's Patrick's plan? Sarah hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. She pulled a document from the pile and handed it to me. This is a complete record of Connor O'Malley's personal finances. Accounts in 12 countries. Properties, investments, and more importantly, evidence of every bribe he's paid to officials around the world. I skimmed the document, my heart racing. It was a prosecutor's dream, detailed, comprehensive damning. Why are you giving me this? Because time is running out, she said urgently. Connor knows Patrick has this information. He's mobilizing everything he has to find him before it can be used. Where is Patrick now? Sarah looked at her watch. Meeting with prosecutors from the International Criminal Court, offering testimony against his father and the entire network in exchange for immunity for those who were part of the Broken Triangle. I felt a sudden rush of conflicting emotions, vindication that the O'Malleys would finally face justice, but frustration that Patrick might escape punishment. He's not innocent in all this. No, she agreed. He's not. But he's trying to end something terrible, even at the cost of betraying his own family. Doesn't that count for something? Before I could answer, one of the ERU officers burst in from his position outside. Vehicle approaching. Fast. Armed men inside. Sarah's face drained of color. They found us. Connolly immediately took charge, positioning our limited personnel at strategic points within the cottage. How many? At least 6 that I could see, the officer reported. Heavily armed. I turned to Sarah. Is there another way out? A path down to the beach. There's a boat, but in this weather, it's our only chance, I decided. Connolly, you and Ryan take Sarah to the boat. The rest of us will hold them off. Connolly looked like he wanted to argue, but knew there was no time. What about you? I'll be right behind you. Go! As they disappeared through a back door, I positioned myself by a window, weapon ready. The approaching Viaclia black SUV skidded to a halt about 50 yards from the cottage. Men poured out, taking cover behind the vehicle and rocks. Police! Drop your weapons! I shouted, knowing it was futile. The answer came in the form of gunfire, a hail of bullets, shattering windows and splintering wood. The cottage, built to withstand Atlantic storms, provided some protection, but it wouldn't last long against a determined assault. One of the ERU officers returned fire, forcing the attackers to keep their distance momentarily. We need to retreat to the beach, I told the officers. Alternate covering fire. I'll go last. The next few minutes were a blur of gunfire, shouted commands, and the acrid smell of cordite. One by one, the officers made their way toward the back of the cottage while others provided cover. Just as I prepared to follow, a new sound cut through the Chaos helicopter rotors. For a moment, I feared Connor had brought air support. But as I risked a glance upward, I saw the distinct markings of the Irish Air Corps. Reinforcements. Through my earpiece came Connolly's voice. "Shernan, we reached the boat." Air Corps responded to our distress call. "They're deploying tactical teams now." The tide had turned. Connor's men, realizing they were about to be surrounded, began a hasty retreat to their vehicle. Several were captured in the ensuing operation. Others, including the leader, escaped into the rugged Donegal landscape. But the immediate danger had passed. Sarah, Connolly, and Ryan returned from the beach once the area was secured. Sarah looked shaken but resolute. "They'll keep coming," she said quietly. "Not for much longer," I assured her, holding up the financial documents she'd provided. "With this, and Patrick's testimony, Connor O'Malley's reign is over." She didn't look convinced. "You don't know him like I do, like Patrick does. He'll burn down the world before he surrenders." Her words would prove prophetic in ways none of us could have anticipated. As we prepared to leave the cottage, my phone rang. A secured line-me superior at the DEA. I stepped away to take the call. "Shernan," I answered. "Are you secure?" The voice was tense, urgent. "Yes." "What's happening?" "Connor O'Malley is dead. His yacht exploded off the coast of Spain 30 minutes ago. No survivors." The news hit me like a physical blow. After 15 years of pursuit, the patriarch of the syndicate was gone, not in handcuffs as I'd always imagined, but in flames. "Was it an accident?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Initial reports suggest a bomb. Sophisticated. Professional." My mind raced through possibilities. A rival organization? A disgruntled partner? Or someone closer? "There's more," my superior continued. "Patrick O'Malley never showed for his meeting with the ICC prosecutors. He's in the wind." I ended the call and turned to find Sarah watching me, her expression unreadable. "Connor is dead," I told her, "and Patrick is missing." She didn't seem surprised. Neither reaction was what I'd expect from an innocent nurse caught in events beyond her control. "You knew," I said. "It wasn't a question." "I suspected," she corrected. "Connor would never let himself be taken alive. And Patrick." She hesitated. "Patrick has one final debt to repay." "To whom?" Her eyes met mine, steady and clear. "To justice. To the thousands of lives destroyed by his family. To Thomas Burke." In that moment, I understood. The Emerald Tide had never been the end game. It was merely a distraction spectacular. 157 million distraction to focus attention on the syndicate's operations while something far more significant unfolded in the shadows. "Where is he going?" I asked. Sarah shook her head. "I don't know, and that's the truth. Patrick said it was better if I didn't know his final destination." I believed her. But I also knew this wasn't over. Patrick O'Malley might want redemption, might even deserve it in some cosmic balance of justice, but the law demanded its due. "I'm going to find him," I told her. "No matter how long it takes." She smiled sadly. "I know you will, Detective Shernan. That's why he respected you so much. You never gave up, even when everyone else did." As we left the cottage, I looked back at the wild Atlantic crashing against the cliffs below. Somewhere out there, Patrick O'Malley was charting a new course away from the empire of crime his father had built, away from the betrayal that had defined his life. Would I find him? Perhaps. But something told me that when I did, it would be because he wanted to be found. The mystery of the Emerald Tide was solved, but the story of Patrick O'Malley's betrayer, who sacrificed everything to destroy his own family's criminal empire, was just beginning, and I would be there when the final chapter was written. The aftermath and moral. In the months that followed, the full extent of the O'Malley Syndicate's operations was exposed. The ledger from the Emerald Tide provided evidence that led to over 200 arrests across 3 continents. Corrupt officials were exposed. Drug routes disrupted millions in criminal assets seized. It was the largest organized crime takedown in European history, triggered by a son's betrayal of his father. Sarah Donovan entered witness protection, her testimony crucial in prosecuting key members of the syndicate. I often wondered about her relationship with Patrick. Was she merely an ally in his quest for redemption, or something more? In the end, I decided it didn't matter. In the shadowy world of organized crime, true connections, whether friendship, love, or loyalty, are rare and precious things. Michael Doyle, the loyal first officer who died helping the crew escape, was given a proper burial. Among the mourners was a hooded figure who left a medallion on the grave of a broken triangle. He vanished before authorities could approach, but I knew who it was. Some debts can only be paid in person, regardless of the risk. As for Patrick O'Malley, reports of sightings came from around the world: Brazil, Thailand, South Africa. Whether any were legitimate, I couldn't say. Part of me hoped he'd found peace somewhere, using his considerable skills for something constructive rather than destructive. Another part of me still wanted to see him answer for his role in the family business, regardless of his eventual betrayal. The Emerald Tide itself was eventually scrapped, its illicit cargo destroyed or used as evidence. But the ship's legacy lived on, in the form of shattered criminal networks and broken chains of corruption. 1 year after the discovery of the ghost ship, I stood on the Irish coast, not far from where it had been found drifting. The same gray Atlantic stretched before me, eternally unchanged by the human dramas that unfolded upon it. My phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. A single Imagia medallion with a broken triangle laid on what appeared to be a tropical beach. Beneath it, a simple message: some triangles must be broken to build something better. I deleted the message and turned away from the sea. Some cases are never truly closed. Some ghosts never fully laid to rest. This is where I would normally end my story for you viewers. But tonight, I want to leave you with something more reflection on what this case taught me about human nature and the choices we all face. The O'Malleys built an empire on exploiting human weakness addiction, greed, fear. For generations, they accumulated wealth and power without concern for the devastation they caused. Lives ruined by drugs, communities terrorized, families destroyed. And yet, from within this corrupt legacy arose someone who chose a different path. Patrick O'Malley had every advantage, every opportunity to continue the family tradition. Instead, he chose to break the cycle at enormous personal cost. The easy path is rarely the right one. Standing against your own family, your own history, requires uncommon courage. It requires acknowledging uncomfortable truths, that those we love may be deeply flawed, that systems we've benefited from may be fundamentally unjust, that our own hands may not be entirely clean. I've spent decades pursuing justice, and if there's one truth I've learned, it's this: redemption is possible for anyone, but it always comes at a price. Patrick paid with his identity, his connections, his entire world. The question we must each ask ourselves is, what price are we willing to pay for our own moral compass? What would you do if you discovered that something you'd been part of your family, your company, your community was causing genuine harm? Would you have the courage to stand against it, even if it meant losing everything you've known? Or would you look away, choosing comfort over conscience? These aren't theoretical questions. Every day, in large and small ways, we all face similar choices. The temptation to go along, to accept that's just how things are, is powerful. Breaking triangles, disrupting harmful patterns, requires both vision to see a better possibility and courage to move toward it. So let me ask you, what triangles in your own life need breaking? What cycles of harm, however small or large, might you have the power to interrupt? The story of the Emerald Tide is extraordinary, but the moral challenge it presents is universal. Like Patrick O'Malley, we all have the capacity to recognize wrong and work toward right, even when doing so comes at great personal cost. If you found value in this story, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe to my channel for more insights from the darkest corners of criminal investigation. And remember, the most important cases we solve are ultimately those within our own hearts and minds. This is Detective William Shernan, signing off. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay questioning, and stay true to your own moral compass.